Hello, and welcome to Tip of the Week by CADtech Seminars, also known as freerevittraining.com. In this video, we're going to cover how to create perf panels in Revit 2010 and 2011 plus. It's not actually that complicated as long as you know a few steps. This tool was actually introduced in 2010, so we'll be using 2010 to show how it works. Not complicated, but can produce really cool results. Let's get started. This is what we're shooting for here, is this panel. Now, what I'm going to do is actually delete it, start from scratch, so you can see how it's actually done. So I'm going to roll over the panel, highlight it, and just go delete. Now, the panel is actually quite easy to create, and has 3 steps. Number 1, we're going to create a mass, a surface actually, and then from that surface, we'll separate the surface into components using the division tool, a divide tool, and then we'll place a panel where those divisions set up. So let's get started. First thing we'll do is go to the massing tab here, and we'll turn on where we can show the mass. Now you can do this in the massing tool of Revit, which is a whole nother interface. You can drop this down, go to New, and you can go to Conceptual Mass, and you can actually create it in here. And if I fire this off, you can see it looks totally different. We can create it in here. But you can also create it in your model. You don't have to go through the process of creating the mass in this location. So just wanted to bring that up. You don't have to do it here. So I'm going to actually do it in my model. That way I'm comfortable with where I am and how things are working. If your model is highly complex, you may consider creating them in here so it works fast and then dumping them into your model. In this scenario, just a simple template file from the basic Revit templates, and we'll go from there. Now, when I come over here and I fire this in-place mass, it's going to fire up the same tools as if I was in the little mass editor. It's going to come up, it's going to tell me that the Revit has set up to show the masses. So it turns on show mass mode, which is this little button right here. So let's hit close on that. Now, we'll give it a name. I'm going to call it, let's say, perf drum, P-E-R-F, drum, D-R-U-M. Okay. So we give it a little name. I hit OK on that. Now, when it fires up, I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to use an arc. Now, I'm in 3D, so it's might be hard to see, but I'm going to back up a little bit. I'm just going to pick a point, pick another point, and flex that arc. So there we go. Nothing real fancy, but we just drew the arc. Now, if we want to get fancy, we can actually, I could even adjust the panels outward or inward. But for this, let's keep it real simple. So we have an arc. Now, with this create form, if you pick on a line and you hit create form, what it will do is it'll actually create a surface, and that's what we just did. So that is what we want to do. Number 1 is actually create the surface. I'm going to turn the shadows off. Okay. Now we'll change this back to shading with edges, and we can see the shape. So all this is for lack of better terms, it's like a piece of cardboard. It has no real depth. It is a plane or surface. Now, with that surface, I'm still in the massing mode, as you can see up top here. I'm going to pick on this object, and now if I pick on the top, you can see I can stretch it up and down. Another thing we can do is, if we go to our elevations, we can tie it in. See, it's placed on, let's say, a particular level. We can grab these objects and then drag them and let them go on that level. You'll see we can lock it to that level. So we can use a lot of the same features that we're comfortable with in Revit. I'll drag this down, and we'll let it lock up on there. So there we go. We've set the height. We'll go back to 3D again. So I've got our object, and we've tweaked it a bit. Now, when I select it, I'm going to select the middle. Now, if I select the top or the edges, I'm able to manipulate the shape. I'll pick on the center of it. You'll notice that the toolbar up top lights up with all kinds of new options. The one we'll use first is Divide Surface. Now, when we fire this up, you can see it divides the selected surface with kind of an isometric, parametric lines. Fancy word there. So, fire this up. Now, it's going to come up and it says, how do you want to grid it out? Now, let's say I'm going to use a 4x4 grid. Maybe that's what the manufacturer makes, so that's what we're considering. So I'm going to change it over from numbers to distance. I'll say set it to 4 feet, and I'll say set the distance to 4 feet. So I'll set them to 4 and 4. And now you'll see the actual pattern is showing up. Now when I drop this down, you'll see the representation. It's just showing the actual surface. If I go to pattern, you'll notice that it's going to show up. It's actually blank. There is no pattern loaded on this surface. So all I have right now is surface. Now if I go up top, we'll go over here and it says patterns. I can drop this down and I can apply a pattern. Now if I scroll down here, you'll see we have some. I'm going to skip over that perf panel because these were created a little earlier. And if I want to add in, let's say, just like a triangle pattern, I can fire this up. And what it's going to do, it's going to show up on the surface here. So this is just some line work. It may be a little hard to see now. So I'm going to go back to, let's say, just hidden lines. And you'll see the actual pattern. Again, by selecting on it, we can go through and say what we want to see, what we don't want to see. Surface representation, you'll see it's now set to pattern. We can turn surface on too, and you see them overlaying each other. So what it's doing now, it's just giving us a grid pretty much. If I hit finish mass and we go away, you'll see we've got just some basic math in there. That's it. We'll say turn off show mass, and it's all gone. So you're thinking, great, so we've done absolutely nothing so far. So let's go back and show the mass. This is where it really comes into play. Now we're going to highlight it one more time, and we're going to hit edit in place because that's what we're doing. We're actually editing in place here. Pick on the panel, and again everything fires up. So we're back where we were before. I'm going to turn something off. I'm going to turn off the pattern. Now within the pattern, we set it to a 4x4 grid so we get a feel of what we're looking for. What I'm going to do now is we can take besides adding the surface, besides adding a pattern, we can add a component. And this is where you can really do some neat things. For instance, just like the splash screen in Revit, this is how they did it. So you can create wild shapes, which I'll do in the next video, and then apply surfaces, etc. to it and do some really neat things. So step number 3. Step number 3 is we're going to go down. We're going to open up, for simplicity, a family. Instead of me creating one from scratch, I'm going to go to curtain panel by pattern. Now when I open this up, you can see we have a lot of different ones in here. I'm going to start with just a rectangle surface, and I hit open. Now again, remember we just want to do a perf drum here, so I just want something relatively clean. Now if I zoom in, you'll see that's pretty much what it is. I can select this object. It's a surface. Do I want a surface or do I want a solid? Well, if I'm punch holes in it, I probably want a solid. So I'm going to hit delete here, and I'm going to get rid of that volume. Now I have some basic geometry that's here. We can manipulate the geometry. We can do some fun things with geometry, and I'll even maybe, well, in the next video or so we'll do more with it. But what I want to do is I want to highlight the geometry. Once it's highlighted, I'm going to say create a form. Now I can come over here and preset some things before I actually fire it up. I come over here and say, okay, I want certain aspects set up. And I'm going to say create a form. Now the form comes up. Do I want a surface or do I want a solid? I'm going to pick on solid. It creates the solid. Now I click off of it and you'll see there's a solid here. I now highlight the solid, and we're going to go to element properties, instance properties, and we're going to make an adjustment. We're going to say instead of being 2 foot thick, well, let's make it something a little bit smaller. Just so we can see it easy, we'll make it 2 inches. And do we want it to be a solid? Yes. Now currently the material is set by category. We could go in here and change that if we want, but I'm going to leave it. Okay. And you'll notice that it drops down. So we got the object drop down, and it's looking pretty good. And we have this panel. Now I could go change it, but if I go to types, you'll notice in here that there's a parameter already set up for material. Now if I pick the solid, it's going to go to default, and if I pick glazed, it'll go to glass. So I could go in here and say, you know what, when I do solid, let me pick a different material. So I'll go in here and I'll say, alright, in this instance, I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call it, let's say, drum. Just so I know what it is. Separates it out. I'll set a color to, let's say, red. I hit OK on that, and I'm also do a render appearance. I'll pick something that's red, maybe a particular plastic. And again, the materials, that's totally up to you. So I come in here and I pick, let's say, a red plastic. Hit OK on that. Hit OK. So now, when I do solid, I get that red drum. I do glazing, I get the glass. So I've got those set up now. We hit OK. So we've got this. Now next thing we're going to do is add some perfs. So I'm going to come over here, fire up the circle, pick in the center, drag over, and I'm going to say instead of create volume, create a void. And it's going to punch a hole in the object for us. We click off, there it is. Now again, this can be laid out. We can go to floor plan view, etc. Lay it all out nice and pretty so you get a repetitious view. I'm just going to do it kind of random. Okay, and I'll do one more. Okay, so we've created some perfs in the panel. At this point, if you wanted to make any more adjustments, again, we could just adjust this, tweak it however we want, even add in parameters. We're not going to get into that aspect of it, but there's the basic panel. At this point, we're going to save it. So I'm going to drop down, hit Save As, and we're going to give the panel a name. When it comes up, let's go to Save As. Okay, we're going to save it as a family. Now, we'll save it in a location so we can use it again. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to call it, let's say, CADtech. Back up a little bit, CADtech, drum perf panel. Okay, dot RFA. Back up there, hit save, and we now created that fancy perf panel. Now, next thing we have to do, load it in the project. We're going to load it in the project 4. We hit OK. Here it comes. Now, it's going to come on in, and it all looks well. And we have our final step. Let's go to 3D. Just to verify, we are still in the mass editing mode. I pick on the mass. And now what we're going to do is, we wait a moment for the screen to change. We're going to drop this down. Being that we loaded it in, we now can add not just a representation of a surface, but we can drop this down and actually add a surface. So it folds down, and now we're going to roll up and go check out what we got in here. You'll see we have our CADtech drum perf panel glazed and perf panel solid. So we'll pick it. I also have one that I've created earlier, which is red, so I'm going to maybe pick on this one. And it comes on in. And what's going to happen is it's going to take that panel and it applies it to the surface. There we go. Now you'll notice that we've getting this nice Swiss cheese effect. Now along the top, you'll notice how it's actually truncating it or actually cutting it off. We could come in here and adjust it by dragging it up, and you'll see how the panels will adjust to fit that. There's another way to make it happen. The reason this is coming up because I locked it to the level, so I'm going to hit remove constraint. Is we can say either A, fill in that space with a panel, or remove all the half panels. To do this, I select here, and we're going to go to Element Properties. I drop this down, and once this opens up, you're going to see we have the ability to add or remove those objects. I'm going to go to Instance Properties, and under here it says Border. It says Partial. I'm going to change that from Partial to either leave the partial ones empty or overhang them. If I overhang them, it's going to expand them out, and we'll hit OK on that. And you'll see how it's going to take those last ones and it'll leave them empty. So you'll see how that works. So we can expand them. So now what we've created is our perf drum. Let's spin it around so we can take a closer look at it. Looking good. Let's throw some shadows on it. Shadows on. Give it a second. Looking real good. Last thing we'll do here is we need to do a couple things. First of all, we need to verify that our mass is finished. So we hit Finish Mass. Okay. So the mass is now finished. Now let's just to make sure there's no smoke and mirrors, let's turn off Show Mass. So the mass actually is going to go away now. It goes away, but notice you don't notice that anything has changed. Now we can come down here. We'll set it up to shading with shading, and you'll notice that we now have a pretty cool perf panel all set up with shadows. Now being that it's tied to that surface, if we go back and want to change that drum or that perf drum, we can go back and make edits to that mass and reset the shape, and it'll update automatically. So there you go. That is creating custom panels using some of the fancier tools in Revit. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.